Hey everyone, and welcome back to World History. Today we're going to be talking about the classical age of Rome, and we're going to talk about Roman culture and way of life. Before we begin, I want to kind of review some of our important topics, such as our essential question: what are some ways the Roman Empire showed command and control? Students today will be learning about the Roman way of life and the effect the Roman Empire had on society. We're going to go over three main concepts: Roman society, Roman culture, and Roman technology. Let's begin. So Roman society. We've talked a lot about Roman society and the many different aspects of it, but today we're specifically going to talk about the kind of divide between the wealthy and the poor. The wealthy included people like Roman governors, officials in society, as well as nobility and people related to the Roman emperor. They had money, power, decadent food, and tons of entertainment. They often live in huge villas with lots of land around them to farm and cultivate. In comparison, the mass majority of society were very poor. Many of them, especially if they weren't citizens, were unable to find work or couldn't keep work for long. It mostly was seasonal work, and when the season ended, the work ended. They relied on a concept called a dole, or a government-given grain. So the government would give out certain amounts of grain or dole out grain. This resulted in many people not having money or power, and they often ate a food made out of that dole called gruel, which looks like the image you see on the screen. Gruel is basically watered down porridge that would be used at the time. In addition, they would often live in cramped tenements. Tenements were ill-maintained apartment buildings that were cramped and dingy and often housed a large amount of people in a small space. This resulted in a lot of tension between the two groups, and Rome knew that if they wanted to keep the people from rebelling and revolting, they had to keep them entertained. So this concept of bread and circus began to circulate. This is the idea that public entertainment, such as Circus Maximus, which are these large chariot races, or Colosseum gladiator fights, where they would fight other people, as well as beasts, and we'll talk a little bit more about gladiators in a second, would often be ways to control the masses. In the Circus Maximus, they would have these chariot races where people would race around, and people could actually fall out of the chariots and be trampled to death. While in gladiator fights, soldiers, often enslaved people from conquered lands, would battle it to the death. And if people didn't like your fight, they would boo you out, and the other person would kill you. They would also be forced to fight wild animals as well as other creatures that could easily kill and overpower them. However, it did come with some benefits. If a gladiator fought well and gained support, they could gain a celebrity status and actually gain a lot of money and even try to earn their freedom. But the biggest part of this is that it gave a chance for both the rich and the poor to entertain themselves and keep people from rebelling against the Roman government. That being said, while the Republic of Rome was mostly citizens farming and taking care of the land, the empire relied mostly on slave labor. Over 1/3 of the population were slaves, and there were many different types. You had citizens who, lost their fortunes and became indebted and became slaves in that capacity, as well as peoples from other lands that they had conquered becoming slaves. There are two main types of slaves. You have domestic slaves, which would represent gladiators, entertainers, or Greek tutors. They were often treated very well and lived in nice accommodations, and they had the ability to buy their freedom and gain independence and citizenship after a short amount of time. However, there were also labor slaves, and these often worked in farms or mines. They had harsh lives, were often whipped or tortured, and there was little chance for them to gain their freedom. Actually, during this time, there was an incredible slave rebellion led by a man named Spartacus. Spartacus was a gladiator who fought in the Colosseum, and he was tired of being a slave, and so he rebelled, and he took, I think it was like 10,000 other slaves with him. It was one of the largest rebellions in Rome at the time, and it took over 8 legions worth of soldiers to finally take them down, which was more than it took for them to take down Hannibal, which we talked about last week in the Punic Wars. So this should say early lives. I don't know why it's all jumbled up, but the early lives and work of the people revolved around, there you go. Early family lives were kind of based mostly on Roman society and values. So in Roman society, men, specifically older men, were seen to be wise and benevolent and strong. Most families had a paterfamilias, which means a father-led ruler, and they were the head of the household, and they had absolute rule of the household based on Roman law. Basically, if they said something, everyone in the house must obey it. These household leaders were always male, typically fathers or grandfathers. Husbands didn't have that same kind of power over their wives because the wife would actually fall under her family's paterfamilia, not her husband, even if he was the paterfamilia of his family. Roman women were taught to raise children, run households, and manage finances. While they didn't often have a leg up in the government, they did have an education because they had to run these homes. They often had to make sure the slaves were doing their work, the children were getting their education, and everything was running smoothly at home while the father went out and did his things. Roman children, because of this, were well educated. They were taught to respect and honor their parents and elders, particularly their paterfamilia, and have loyalty to the empire and the republic. Young boys were educated in literature, history, math, and ancient Greek, all to give them a leg up in society and make it easier for them to become part of the political sphere later on. Roman culture was very much this idea of imitation over flattery. It wasn't about, we're going to be mad that this other people have this culture or values. Instead, we're going to take it for ourselves. This concept was called Greco-Roman. Rome often mixed its values and ways of life with others, especially Greek, and this would become an influence that is still around today. Roman children would read the Iliad and Odyssey and study under Greek philosophers. Like I said, many boys were sent to ancient Greek to learn and to gain education. They often adopted skills of other conquered people, adapting them to their way of life, and even adopted many of their gods. They both spread and collected religions as they conquered different cultures and adapted these cultures to Roman values, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So this early religion was mostly taking gods from other cultures and adapting it to ancient Rome. So they would Roman values revolved around central concepts such as loyalty, family, paterfamilias, the republic, as well as the empire and the leaders at the time. And often what they did is they would just take the Roman gods and make it more towards what they wanted. For example, they took Zeus, the Greek god of the king of gods, and named him Jupiter. Hera became Juno, Poseidon Neptune, Hades Pluto, and so on and so on. Some gods actually gained additional abilities. Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom, became Minerva, who was still the goddess of wisdom, but also the god of strategy and tactic in war. Ares became the god of Mars and became the god of war and destruction. These different gods would have a vast power. Most importantly, though, was the god Vesta, who at the time was Hestia, or the goddess of the hearth in Greek. Vesta became the central of Rome and Roman way of life, and they had a giant temple towards her in the middle. And Vesta had 72 virgins who would keep an eternal flame lit in Rome every day. It represented Roman's eternal flame, or continuing to be each day. If the flame didn't go out, the Rome wouldn't exist forever. They also instituted daily rituals that would impact and guide kind of Roman way of life and how they viewed or did things, as well as seasonal festivals that kind of dictated Roman values and times of year. In addition to the gods, they created a literacy rise in a lot of ways. There was lots of different types of poetry and books that were written at this time, as well as stories and epics. They would often depict Roman life, the lives of the emperors, what was going on in conquering, and they captured this concept called carpe diem, which you might have heard, which means seize the day. And it would be encompassed in many of the different rituals we see in ancient Rome. You had Virgil, who wrote the book Aeneid, which was a book of Roman epics similar to the Odyssey and Iliad. He wanted to kind of encompass that way of life. And it specifically talked about Roman ideals such as sacrifice, loyalty, and family. On the other hand, you had Ovid, who created satires, which were these humor-based plays poking fun at, and criticizing aspects of Roman life, people, and politics. He would often poke fun at the emperor and Roman ideals, which got him a lot of criticism. Antisus wrote the Annals, which was Roman history and political thought that would become the kind of backbone of Roman value system and how Roman history would be depicted. On the other side, you had Roman art. Much like everything else in Rome, it copied Greek. Originally, it copied Greek much like the idealist look, with this godlike Augustus figures with all these different majestic and regal things. However, over time, it became less ideal and more realistic, showing human flaws and emotions. They also created frescoes with these bright, colorful stories that were depicted in homes, often representing different mythologies and ways of life. And then you had mosaics, which these tiny tile artworks that would be put together to create an image or design. They were used both as, portraits, home decor, as well as public signs. Actually, there's one that says, "Beware of the dog" in ancient Latin, showing basically original version of "a dog lives here" sign. In addition to art, they had a vast amount of technology. This technology would allow for a huge development in ancient Greek, especially in architecture and engineering. They developed something called Roman concrete, which used lime, water, and sand to create these enormous structures. They built the Colosseums as well as the Pantheon, which was a beautiful done temple to the gods, much like the Parthenon in ancient Greek, many of which still are around today. They also created aqueducts. These were waterways, like this one up here, that allowed water to flow into cities, making it easier for sewer systems and to have working water systems. They also developed public baths called thermas that were used throughout ancient Greek and are still actually used in some places today. The bottom part would be heated with wood to produce steam, and then the aqueducts would pump in water and allow for these beautiful baths that people would take and kind of enjoy. And they were the pride of Rome, this architecture and these beautiful monuments that stood up to time. In addition to technology, they developed infrastructure, which was Roman roads that circumvented the entire Roman Empire. This system allowed to connect conquered lands, and they were the best type of roads at this time. One of the most famous road is the Appian, which is depicted up here, which was called the Regina of Rome, the Queen of the Road. Engineers oversaw the construction of these roads, and they were often built by soldiers on campaign. These roads allowed armies to move quickly, as increasing travel, trade, allowing for the Silk Road to grow, and of course, allowing the army to conquer even faster. In addition to infrastructure, this was an increased time for medicine or medical practices. Unlike ancient Greek, which was mostly about theory, ancient Rome was all about practical applications. And so they would take and adapt Greek ideas and conquered knowledge to develop new types of ways to use medicine. Galen, who was a Greek-born man who gained citizenship in Rome, was a physician and philosopher. He studied in Alexandria, one of the greatest cities of the time, and used anatomy to heal and cure illnesses. So anatomy is the study of the body parts and how the body works. And so while at the time it was considered taboo and illegal to dissect humans, he would dissect animals to see how the human body and different organs work. He is seen as a founder of modern medicine, though many of his practice would later be debunked, especially because he often assumed because a pig looked a certain way or a dog looked a certain way, humans would look the same. But he did bring up the practice of using anatomy in medicine and would become one of the founders of modern medicine for years to come. So today we covered quite a bit of history. We talked about the Colosseum, Spartacus's rebellion, Galen autonomy studies, as well as a variety of aspects of Roman culture, all of which were part of the Pax Romana, as well as the years to come after it, which we'll talk about in our corresponding slides. As you head out today, think about how the rich and poor play into the very aspects of Roman culture and values, how entertainment was used to keep everyone in check, the difference between slaves and family life in the paterfamilia, how culture, religion, and epics were all shaped by this adopting and changing culture to fit Roman needs. How art and science was used by Rome to advance society, great structures and roads, as well as medicine and anatomy, all of which helped create the foundation for Roman way of life in the Roman Empire. Before you leave, think about our challenge question for this week. The word empire means imperium in Latin, or to command. What are some ways that the Roman Empire showed command and control in all of its aspects of life? Have a great day. If you need any help with anything, feel free to give me a call, send me an email, or come to office hours.